When the priest asked her if she would take this man to be her lawfully wedded husband, Claire Thompson didn't hesitate. "I do," she said, her voice steady, her eyes glowing with a fevered devotion. The congregation sat frozen in silence. The groom didn't answer. He couldn't. His lips were sewn shut, his skin gray and waxed from embalming, his lifeless hands trembling only because Claire forced them to move with strings hidden beneath his sleeves. The stench of decay seeped through the church, mingling with incense and roses. A fly landed on his cheek. No one dared to breathe. Claire leaned forward and kissed him. Her lips pressed against the cold, cracked flesh of a corpse. And when she pulled back, smiling through blood and formaldehyde, she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Finally, he's mine forever." The day of the funeral should have been the end, but for Claire Thompson, it was the beginning. The California sun was blinding that morning, burning against the black umbrellas that dotted the cemetery like bruised flowers. The mourners whispered, some with genuine grief, others with curiosity, but Claire heard none of it. Her gaze was fixed only on the coffin being lowered into the earth. Inside lay Daniel Cole, her fiancé, her almost husband, her everything. He had died too suddenly, too violently for her mind to catch up. One moment they were drinking wine on the porch of his family's old ranch house. The next he was crumpled on the floor, a crimson pool spreading beneath him. A heart attack, the doctors had said. 28 years old, strong as a horse, and he just stopped. She hadn't cried when they buried him, not a single tear. Her face was pale, her hands clenched, her body trembling, but her eyes remained dry. To the mourners it looked like shock. To Claire it felt like betrayal, her body refusing to honor him with grief. But she knew why. Because it wasn't over, because Daniel wasn't gone. That night, while the others returned home to casseroles and condolences, Claire stayed behind at the cemetery gates. She watched the last of the mourners fade away, the sound of car doors slamming and tires crunching on gravel. Soon the graveyard was empty, except for her and the fresh mound of earth that covered her fiancé. The silence was suffocating. The only movement came from the moths fluttering around the lamps, their wings like fragile whispers. Claire stood there for hours, watching, waiting, hoping. And then, just past midnight, she did something no grieving bride-to-be should ever do. She dug. Her nails tore through dirt until they bled. Her arms ached as she clawed at the soil, desperate, wild, unstoppable. When her strength finally failed, she seized a discarded shovel leaning against a nearby shed and drove it into the earth again and again, the metallic clang echoing through the night. By the time she reached the coffin, her dress was shredded, her skin caked with mud, her breath ragged. She paused, chest heaving, her face streaked with sweat and soil. For a moment, reason tried to pull her back. "This is madness, Claire. He's dead. He's gone." But love, twisted and raw, roared louder. She pried open the coffin. The smell hit her first, sharp and chemical. The cloying sweetness of embalming fluid, mixed with something darker, earthier. She gagged, tears finally spilling, but not from grief, from the overwhelming stench of death. And there he was, Daniel, her groom, her corpse. His skin was pale and waxy, his lips tinged blue, his hair perfectly arranged as though still prepared for guests. He looked peaceful, almost asleep, except for the terrible stillness of his chest. Claire reached out with trembling fingers, brushing her hand against his. Cold, hard, unforgiving. Yet she smiled. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking into a sob, "I won't let them take you from me." And in that moment, under the California stars, surrounded by silence and death, Claire decided. There would still be a wedding, even if it killed her. The wedding hadn't been announced in newspapers. There were no invitations, no photographers, no laughter spilling from bridesmaids. Only a handful of people filled the pews. Family members, close friends, neighbors who had come more out of obligation than joy. Most of them whispered behind their hands, uncertain why the ceremony had been called so soon after Daniel's funeral. The casket had barely been covered in soil before Claire had demanded the church reopen its doors. Her mother pleaded with her, "Claire, sweetheart, this isn't right. You need time to grieve. He's gone." But Claire's eyes, hollow and shimmering with a strange light, cut her off. "No, he's here." And indeed, Daniel was there. Standing, or rather propped, at the altar, his tuxedo pressed, his boutonniere still fresh. To those sitting far back, he could almost pass for alive. Almost. But up close, the truth was undeniable. His skin had the waxy sheen of death, his eyes sunken beneath lids that Claire had carefully pinned open. His hands were stiff, locked in place, and the faintest trace of embalming fluid leaked from his sleeves, staining the cufflinks he had once chosen with so much care. The priest's hands shook as he held the Bible, his voice faltering with every word. He had argued against it, had begged Claire to reconsider, but she threatened to expose secrets he thought long buried if he refused. So he performed the ritual. Against God, against sanity, against life itself. Claire, radiant in her wedding dress, never looked away from her groom. She smoothed his jacket when it sagged, adjusted his tie when it slipped, and whispered under her breath, as though coaxing him to stay upright. The guests sat frozen in horror, trapped between disbelief and fear. Some crossed themselves, others stared at the doors, calculating the shame of leaving versus the terror of staying. When the priest finally muttered the words, "You may now kiss the groom," Claire leaned forward. And that was when Mrs. Garvey, an elderly neighbor, let out a strangled cry. The scent had reached her at last, sweet rot and formaldehyde bleeding through cologne and roses. But Claire didn't flinch. She pressed her lips to Daniel's, kissing him with the kind of desperation reserved for the living. His skin split slightly under the pressure, and a bead of darkened blood stained her veil. The church erupted. Gasps, cries, footsteps scrambling. Half the congregation fled. The others sat paralyzed. But Claire, she smiled through the chaos, because in her mind, the vows had bound them. Till death do us part meant nothing. Death had already come, and she had chosen to stay. By dawn, the town of Willow Creek was boiling with rumors. People swore they had seen it with their own eyes. Claire Thompson, radiant in white lace, kissing the lips of her dead fiancé as though nothing were amiss. Some insisted it was a cruel illusion, a wax figure sculpted to resemble Daniel. Others swore they smelled the truth, that sickly perfume of death no candle could mask.
At Maisie's diner on Main Street, the gossip spilled hotter than coffee. "I tell you, she dug him up," Mrs. Garvey croaked, slamming her spoon against the counter. "That girl pulled him straight out of the ground." The trucker beside her scoffed. "That ain't possible. Ain't legal, neither." Maisie, wiping her hands on her apron, leaned in with a whisper. "I heard she paid off the funeral home. That boy never made it to the ground at all." By the time the noon rush ended, stories had grown monstrous. Claire dancing with Daniel's corpse at midnight, Claire feeding him raw meat, Claire whispering to him in the graveyard as though waiting for him to answer. And though most laughed nervously, none dared to say it too loudly, because beneath the ridicule lay unease. Willow Creek was a town that believed in old things, ghost lights, curses, the desert swallowing the sinful. If Claire truly had bound herself to the dead, who knew what she might unleash?
Meanwhile, Claire sat in the house she once shared with Daniel, her bridal gown still hanging from the bedpost like a ghost. The curtains were drawn, the air thick with lilies, and something darker beneath. Daniel was there too, upright in his chair at the dining table, his body supported by wires Claire had hidden beneath his suit, his head lolled to one side, his eyes staring blankly toward the window. Claire set a plate in front of him, steak, seared and steaming. She cut pieces carefully, placing them against his lips, whispering, "Eat, darling, you have to keep your strength." The meat slipped down his chin, staining the collar of his tuxedo. Claire dabbed it gently with her napkin, as though tending to a feverish husband. To her, the silence was not silence at all. She heard his voice in the creak of the chair, in the sigh of the air vents, in the rustle of the curtains. "You're still here," she murmured, pressing her forehead to his. "You'll always be here, and no one will take you from me." But outside her window, the world was closing in. Sheriff Dawson had already received 3 calls by morning. The church had filed a formal complaint, the priest refusing to set foot inside the sanctuary until it was cleansed. And whispers had reached the county coroner, who knew exactly how illegal it was to tamper with a corpse. Claire didn't care. She couldn't hear the world's outrage through the hum of her obsession. For her, the funeral had been the wedding, and now the honeymoon had just begun. By the 3rd day, the town could no longer ignore it. The Cole family name had deep roots in Willow Creek. Daniel's father had been a respected rancher. His mother, a schoolteacher, beloved by generations of children. To see their son's memory dragged through the mud, whispers of desecration, of unholy rites, was more than they could stomach. So it was Mrs. Cole herself who came to the house on Sycamore Lane. Claire was seated at the dining table, Daniel across from her. She had dressed him in one of his casual shirts that morning, rolled up the sleeves so the stiffening of his arms wouldn't be as obvious. She had even dabbed foundation across his cheeks to soften the gray. To Claire, it looked almost normal, a husband and wife sharing breakfast. To anyone else, it would have been a nightmare. The knock at the door startled her. 3 sharp raps, impatient, trembling with fury. She rose slowly, smoothing her dress, and opened the door. Mrs. Cole stood there, her eyes red-rimmed but blazing. Behind her loomed Sheriff Dawson, hat in hand, his face grim. "Claire," Mrs. Cole said, her voice low and venomous, "where is my son?" Claire blinked. "He's right here." She stepped aside, gesturing toward the dining table. Mrs. Cole's face blanched as her gaze landed on Daniel. Her knees buckled and Dawson caught her by the elbow before she collapsed. The sheriff's voice was harsh. "Jesus Christ, Claire, what the hell have you done?" Claire tilted her head, confused at their horror. "We're married now. Didn't you hear the vows? He chose me. He'll never leave me." The sheriff pinched the bridge of his nose, his hand trembling. "You can't keep him here. This isn't right. It's against the law. It's against God." But Claire only smiled. "You think you can take him from me? You bury him. You call it peace. But I know better. He still belongs to me." Mrs. Cole broke then, wailing, clutching at the sheriff's arm as if begging him to act. "Please, Dawson, make her let him go. Don't let her do this to my boy." The sheriff stepped forward, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. He stopped only when he stood over Daniel's body, his jaw tightening at the sight. "Claire," he said slowly, carefully, "if you don't give him up, I'll have no choice but to take him from you, by force." For a moment, silence stretched. Claire's breath came shallow. Her gaze darted from Daniel's empty eyes to the sheriff's hand hovering near his holster. And then she laughed, a sound sharp and breaking, like glass under pressure. "You think you're stronger than love, Sheriff? You think you can stand between a wife and her husband?" She stepped closer to Daniel, placing her hands on his shoulders protectively. "If you try to take him, I'll bury myself beside him, and I swear I'll drag him deeper than any of you can ever reach." The sheriff froze, reading the madness in her eyes. He backed away slowly, pulling Mrs. Cole with him. At the door he spoke again, his voice like steel. "This isn't over, Claire. I'll be back, with the law at my side." When the door closed, Claire returned to Daniel, cupping his cold face in her hands. "They'll never understand us," she whispered. "But they'll see. They'll all see. You're mine forever." And in the shadowed silence of the house, a fly buzzed across his lips and landed on her cheek, as though sealing the vow she had spoken. Nights were the hardest. The house creaked under the California heat. Shadows stretched too long across the walls, and silence pressed in on Claire like a suffocating blanket. It was in those moments, when the world slept, that she feared Daniel might slip away from her. So she kept candles burning in every room, their flames trembling like tiny hearts. She sat across from him in the living room, whispering stories of their past, the night he kissed her in the vineyard, the day they planned their wedding under the oak tree. At first, there was only silence. His head slumped, his lips sealed. But as the hours bled into one another, Claire began to hear him. It was faint at first, a murmur under her own breath. "Claire." She froze, her pulse racing. "Daniel?" His lips hadn't moved. His chest hadn't risen. But the voice was there, sliding into her ears, curling into her skull. "Don't let them take me." Claire's eyes flooded with tears. She clutched his hand, pressing it to her cheek despite its stiff coldness. "I won't. I promise. They don't understand us, but I won't let them separate us." The voice grew stronger with every passing night. Sometimes it was tender, like the way he used to sing her name in the mornings. Sometimes it was darker, sharper, commanding. "Bind me tighter. Don't let me fall apart. Keep me close, closer." And she obeyed. She sewed his cuffs shut to keep his arms from slipping out of the shirt. She tied fishing wire beneath his jaw so his head wouldn't loll forward when guests peeked through the windows.
She even powdered his skin to hide the deepening gray, her hands gentle as though applying cologne before a date. Each task became a ritual, each ritual a vow. But as Daniel's voice filled her nights, another sound grew louder too, the pounding of boots outside her door. Neighbors gathered at the edge of the property, whispering, pointing, daring each other to approach. Sometimes stones rattled against her shutters. Other times she awoke to find strange markings scrawled on her fence: witch, grave robber, devil's bride. The sheriff's threats still rang in her head, but now Daniel's voice drowned them out. "Let them come," he murmured in her mind. "Let them watch. You and I are stronger than all of them. They'll see. They'll pay."
And in the flickering glow of her candles, Claire smiled through her tears, because she no longer ate alone. She no longer slept alone. Her groom was with her, forever. By the end of the week, Willow Creek felt less like a town and more like a throat tightening around Claire's house. Everywhere she went, on the rare occasion she dared step outside, eyes followed her. At the grocery store, conversations fell into silence the moment her shadow crossed the aisle. Mothers pulled children closer. Old men spat on the ground as she passed. She ignored them. She bought what she needed: candles, bleach, powders, and returned to the house where Daniel waited patiently for her by the window. But outside her walls, the whispers swelled into shouts. At night, voices rose from the street. "Witch! Bury him, you sick girl! Let the dead rest!" One night, she awoke to find a crude cross nailed to her front gate, the wood splintering with hurried force. Another morning, a dead coyote was left on her porch, its throat slit, its fur drenched in blood that dripped across her welcome mat. The sheriff came once more, not alone this time. A deputy stood behind him, and 2 men from town lingered near the fence, arms folded. "Claire," Dawson called from the porch, his voice stern but measured. "We can't allow this to go on. You're tearing this town apart." She opened the door. Daniel's hand clasped tightly in hers, as though he were standing beside her instead of sitting lifeless in the parlor. "You think I'm the problem?" she asked, her voice sharp with scorn. "It's you, all of you. You can't stand to see love survive where yours has died." Dawson's face hardened. "This isn't love. This is desecration. And if you won't give him up willingly, the county will issue an order. We'll take him back and bury him properly." The words stabbed deeper than knives. Claire's breath caught, her nails digging into her palms until blood welled. "You won't touch him," she hissed. "Not while I breathe." The sheriff tipped his hat, his eyes dark. "Then you'd best be ready, Claire, because they're running out of patience."
"Claire?" Dawson called from the porch, his voice stern but measured. "We can't allow this to go on. You're tearing this town apart." She opened the door, Daniel's hand clasped tightly in hers as though he were standing beside her instead of sitting lifeless in the parlor. "You think I'm the problem?" she asked, her voice sharp with scorn. "It's you! All of you! You can't stand to see love survive where yours has died!" The sheriff's face hardened. "This isn't love. This is desecration. And if you won't give him up willingly, the county will issue an order. We'll take him back and bury him properly." The words stabbed deeper than knives. Claire's breath caught, her nails digging into her palms until blood welled. "You won't touch him," she hissed. "Not while I breathe." The sheriff tipped his hat, his eyes dark. "Then you'd best be ready, Claire, because they're running out of patience." As if to prove him right, more figures appeared at the edge of her property that night. Neighbors with lanterns, with whispers sharp as blades. They lingered in the dark, staring at her windows, their faces pale and watchful.
Claire pulled the curtains tight and pressed her forehead against Daniel's cold temple. His voice slid into her ear, soothing, commanding. "Don't fear them, my love. They'll never take me from you. Not while you have me." And though the house was surrounded by hate, Claire smiled. Because in her mind, they weren't fighting her. They were fighting them. Husband and wife, bound in love, even against the living. Claire no longer opened the curtains. The outside world was gone, nothing but noise, hate, and hands trying to rip Daniel from her. So she had boarded the windows with planks, sealed the doors with nails, and filled the air with hundreds of burning candles. The house glowed like a shrine, flickering gold against peeling wallpaper. And in the center of it all sat Daniel, or what was left of him. His skin was darkening, his features collapsing inward. The wires Claire had once hidden so carefully now pulled grotesquely at his face, distorting his smile into something monstrous. His shirt was stiff with dried fluids, his hair falling in brittle strands. But she didn't see that. Not anymore. In her eyes, he was whole. His smile warm, his eyes alive, his voice louder than ever. He spoke to her from every corner of the room, deep and commanding, tender and cruel all at once. "You kept me, Claire. You proved your love." "Yes," she whispered, kissing his decayed hand. "We're together, forever." "They will never forgive you. Let them rot in their hate. Then make them rot for me." Her dreams grew bloodier each night. She saw herself dragging the sheriff into the house, saw herself stitching the priest's lips shut for daring to doubt their vows. She woke with dirt under her nails, unsure if she had been sleepwalking to the graveyard or only dreaming it. The house smelled of sweetness and rot, a perfume so thick it clung to her skin, seeped into her hair. She no longer noticed. When hunger gnawed at her, she cooked for two, placing meals in front of Daniel, chewing her share slowly while whispering encouragement for him to eat. When loneliness pressed too hard, she curled into his rigid lap, humming wedding songs until dawn. The outside world still circled. She heard footsteps in the night, saw lantern light through cracks in the boards. But no one dared storm her again. Not after the last time. Not after the blood that had stained her hands when they tried. Now, Willow Creek spoke her name only in whispers. Children were told not to wander near Sycamore Lane.
Old men spat and muttered about witches. The sheriff stopped knocking. And Claire? She wore her wedding dress again. It hung loose, stained with old dirt and streaked with wax. But she didn't care. She braided her hair with dead roses and pressed her lips to Daniel's once more. "Soon," his voice rumbled in her skull, "soon you'll be more than my bride. You'll be mine in death, too." She smiled through tears, her eyes shining in the candlelight. "Yes, Daniel, take me with you." And for the first time since he died, she swore she felt him move beneath her hands.
The night air pressed against the boarded windows, suffocating in its stillness. Outside, the town slept, or thought it did, ignorant of the shrine of madness on Sycamore Lane. Inside, Claire sat before Daniel, her fingers tracing the sharp lines of his jaw, the stiff curve of his hands. Candles burned low, wax pooling like blood on the floorboards. The air reeked of rot, perfume, and a sweetness that made her dizzy. "Are you ready, my love?" she whispered. For a moment, nothing answered. Then, the shift. Daniel's eyes, hollow before, seemed to glint, catching the flicker of candlelight. His head tilted, almost imperceptibly toward her. The wires beneath his suit creaked, and a low sound, almost like a groan, escaped his throat. Claire's heart thundered. She had waited for this moment for days, months, perhaps years. She no longer kept track. "Yes," she breathed, "we'll be together, forever." The voice came, stronger now, not in her mind, but in the air, in the room, vibrating the walls. "Forever bound." A shiver ran down her spine as she saw the impossible. Daniel's corpse shifting on its own. The rigid wires and stitches no longer seemed to hold him back. He rose from the chair, slow, jerky, horrifyingly alive. Claire's hands shook, but she didn't pull away. "It's okay, Daniel. I'm here. I won't let anyone take you."
The corpse bridegroom reached for her. Cold, stiff fingers grazed her cheek. The touch was ice against her fevered skin. Yet she leaned into it. Outside, the faint crackle of fire from the lanterns went unnoticed, as the house seemed to breathe on its own. Shadows twisted, forming shapes too dark and sharp to be human. Whispers rose from the corners of the room. "You are mine, as I am yours," the voice rasped. Claire gasped, a mixture of fear and ecstasy, and pressed herself against him. The candles flickered violently, casting monstrous shapes against the walls. The floorboards groaned, as though the house itself was alive, bearing witness to the union of life and death. The world outside would never understand. The town, the sheriff, even Daniel's own family, they were all irrelevant. The line between reality and nightmare had been obliterated. Claire's lips met his once more. The flesh was cold, stiff, yet something beneath it, something unholy, responded. Her mind screamed in euphoria and terror simultaneously. And as the candlelight guttered out, plunging the room into darkness, a single thought consumed her. At last, nothing, neither death nor life, could ever part them.
And in that darkness, the whispering began again, louder now, echoing from the shadows of the walls, the corners of the ceiling, the spaces between life and death. "Forever
bound together.